Okay, good morning. We are Hemshech Tzadik Daled, 5694, page 110, which is corresponds with Ayin Beis, page 1150, volume 2. I should mention the pages have been posted now. So if you go to ayinbeis.com, you'll have all the continuing pages of PDFs of what we're learning right now. So with that said, okay. So the Frierdiker Rebbe is elaborating on the theme of, in the third interpretation of the ayin, of the channel and field of energy, between Yesh Amiti and Yesh Nivra, referring to Pnimi, the immanent and internal energy, and we called it the etzem and ispashtus of that the core and the extension, and then he called it the inner and outer dimension of this energy. So to understand that, he's talking about the inner and outer dimension of Kalim. One is, it's the Kali itself, as a Kali, its essential personality is to receive and absorb that which it contains, whether it's physically wine in a kos, in a cup, or it's a keli, a talmid, a student receiving wisdom from his teacher, or any other example. The outer dimension of the container is as it relates to outside of itself. Not about its own, it's about being mashpia and being megala, transmitting and revealing, whether it's drinking from the cup, or it's pouring from the cup, or the functionality of it. Now, in chapter 23, which we began learning yesterday, he said, we have to say even a deeper level, the difference between Pnimius and Chitzonius, which on one hand, they're both sides of one dimension. When you say Pnimius, the Pnimius of this Chitzonius, and this Chitzonius of this Pnimius. So it's the inner and outer of a certain level. It's not two different entities. Yet, he says, but they're chalukim be'etzem uhusam. And yet, they have a fundamental core difference between them. So there's both sides to it. They're commonality, they're part of one domain, one entity, one level, but they're different. Now, we already learned the difference in the earlier, which is what I just described, the difference of being containing and transmitting. Now he's saying that to go deeper into it, he says that the Chitzonius HaKelim is the root of the Malachim, Shluchei Shefa. They're the messengers of the flow. They channel the Dvar Hashem, the word of God, and the message from the Eibishter to whatever the B'shlichas they have. So they're rooted in Chitzonius HaKelim. And as such, just like the Chitzonius HaKelim, its main purpose, its primary purpose is transmitting outside of itself, not the receiving part, but the giving part. Same thing with Malachim. The focus is what their shlichus is, what it is that they will be a shliach toward doing. Okay. That's the mechus of the shliach, of the malach. Then he continues and says the mitzias of the mechus will become then the mechus of the mitzias. And what is that? That's the shira that they sing, the praise. The shira, he calls that the mitzias, the mechus of the mitzias, which is an extension and flows from their mechus, from the mitzias of their mechus, which is to be shluchim, shluchei shefa. Okay. And the shira compared to the shlichus is a chitzonius compared to a pnimius. I'm reading from the bottom, I'm summing up from the bottom of page 109. The Neshamas, on the other hand, they're rooted in Pnimius HaKelim, because their main function is not transmitting, their main function is receiving, is being a Kelim Telekus. That's the word he used. Shem Kelim Telekus, containers, receptacles for the divine. And not just Etzem HaNeshama, Chida, which is a Keli for Yochid, top of page 110 right now, summing up. but also the way the neshama and its reflection comes down to the lower levels, not just yichida, chaya, and nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya. It comes into the body and into the natural soul, the biological dimension. There too, it's also a keli telakus. And he brings the proof from v'oseh limigdash v'shachanti b'seicham. Build for me a holy sanctuary, and I will rest b'chol seich kol echad ve'echad within you. That means each of you, each neshama down below is a keli, a mishkan for a lakus. Good. We ekolach nisol hu migdash. That's the word he uses. Every Jew individual is a migdash, is a sanctuary. Mochin l'shivtecha pa'alta Hashem. You're a mochin l'shivtecha, a channel, a home, a receptacle. So neshama is gam k'may shem b'didosam l'mato mislap shem b'guv v'nefesh l'am him mochin l'shivte is barach. That's where we stopped yesterday. Top of page, on the 6th line of page 110. So now let's continue. So he's going to continue talking about neshamas. It says, V'oid yeser, and even more so, or moreover, the whole inyan yiridasan lamata, the whole inyan, the whole purpose, the whole meaning, significance of the neshamas descend below in this material world, in a body, in a physical body, in a physical world, is to radiate the worlds, to illuminate the worlds, with the light of Torah and Aveda, became a mitzvahs, and the Aveda, the service and work in performance of mitzvahs. So now he's continuing. He said, till now, he just said that the neshama is a keli, a container, a migdash, a mochen for godliness. Now he says, and even more so, the neshama, the whole inyan of it coming below is to illuminate, is to shine, which immediately tells you it's more than just to receive, it's to give. So let's see where he's going with this, how it's different than malachim. Kamesha Kosov, like it says, Neir Havaya Nishmas Adam. The flame of God is the soul of a human being. The Nishmas Shel Adam, the soul of a person, who Neir Hashem, it's a flame of God. So it's not just a keli for the divine light. The neshama is also a flame of God. And what does a flame do? It illuminates. Ukamoya ner, kishemeir, like a ner. So the mashal that the pasuk says in Mishlei, that a neshama is like a flame. So from a flame and a candle, we can learn what a neshama is like. Because that pasuk says a neshama is like a ner. Ukamoya ner, so like a ner, like a flame. Kishemeir, when it radiates. Not only is it a fact that a person can see. In other words, when it's a dark room and you don't have a flame lit, you can't see what's in the room. So the first thing it does is it radiates, illuminates the rooms. That a person can see what's going on. And once he sees what's going on, he won't, lo yikoshel be'etzah be'evan is expression by Neir Shabbos, but lo yikoshel, he wouldn't slip, he wouldn't fall, he wouldn't be in any, gestreichelt is the Yiddish translation, yikoshel. So lo yikoshel, he shouldn't be, I guess, impeded. But bottom line is when the room is dark and you can't see, what can happen? You can bump into a chair, into a table, or worse.
They should not stumble.
You don't see them, so you don't know what to do. When the room is lit up, lo yikoshel, will not become in any way stumble. Okay, good, yeah. Will not stumble as a result. So there's the expression by Neir Shabbos, it says lo yikoshel be'etz u'be'evan. A person shouldn't stumble by a piece of wood or a stone, because those days there could be a wood and stone. So the light basically doesn't change the reality in the room, but it allows you to see, and therefore to see what everything is there. So you, God forbid, do not stumble or in any way be affected by. So that's levadzes. That's, besides this, he's talking now the function of a ner, of a light, of a flame. So he says, you shouldn't stumble in anything dvarim mazikim, which means things that can be destructive. But furthermore, not only that, but furthermore, the flame, the light of the flame allows you to walk and to move and travel an expansive and a direct way. I mean, very basic. If you're driving a car and you have no headlights, what's going to happen? Number one, unfortunately, you can crash, God forbid. Number two, you can't really go fast and expansive and in a straight direction because you have to be very careful. Basically, the flame, what it does is, number one, you see what's going on, you see the landscape, so you know not to be hurt by anything. And above that, it actually allows you to really travel properly. And travel here, he doesn't just mean physically, he means in every possible way. Light basically gives you a sense, a lay of the land, so you can go, but derech rechava uses, expansive, rechava is like wide, and yeshara straight. Without a light, you wouldn't know how to do that. You'd have to be very, like let's say somebody walking in a dark room. Forget about it. The fact that he's not stumbling. You walk very slowly. You can't move quickly. You're not confident because you don't know where you are. Kumoy Kain, hu aner de haneshama. So since Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, so just like a Ner, these two things it accomplishes, that it allows you to see so you shouldn't stumble, and allows you to really travel in an expansive way and direct way. Same thing with Ner HaNeshama. The same thing with the Neshama, the flame of the soul. That also a little light dispels a lot of darkness. So he's adding now an element here, more than just, I mean, it's the same idea that light allows you to see, but he's saying even a little light dispels a lot of darkness. Uksiv, the Teda Er, Ner Mitzvah v'Teda Er. So he's basically saying that just like, well, let's read the whole thing, then we'll sum it up. And it also says the Antera is also called Er. So Neshama is called Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, a flame. Teira is called Er. So he explains, Shatera me'ira leila ha'adam. The Teira radiates or illuminates for the person. B'chol inyana v'hanegesov. In all his matters and all his behaviors and everything that he's involved in. All his involvements, all his interactions. Hanagesav means all forms of behavior, basically, everything you do. Gam bin yoneh elam, not just, in other words, not just in yoneh kedusha, a mitzvah or not a mitzvah. Also in yoneh elam, matters of the world, worldly matters. Kishem al pidini hatera v'darkei hatera. That when they are following and they are according to the laws of Torah and the paths of Torah. In other words, not just the laws, but also the methodology of Torah. The paths of Torah are pleasant paths. Shalom is the pasuk. Its ways, its paths, or its ways are pleasant ways. And the Siva says more like pathways. Its paths are all shalom. It doesn't bring the second half, but it's the same idea. So Torah has Dini HaTorah, tells you do this, don't do that. There's also Darkei HaTorah. Divrei Torah benachas nishma. Divrei Chacham benachas nishma. That a Chacham speaks with a certain way. In other words, there's also a method, a way of behavior. So that's what Torah does. So just to spell it out, he's saying like this. The neshama comes down below to radiate. Radiate means to know where to travel, where not to travel, to avoid things that can be stumbling and hurtful. And most importantly, and moreover, to travel and know where to travel in a very clear way. So Torah is also Er. So Torah basically is like the blueprint that the neshama follows. So the Torah, the light of the Torah, helps the neshama's light. So neshama, together with Torah, knows how to behave in every given way. In other words, if the neshama didn't have Torah, it wouldn't know what to do. So what do? Right now you're in a situation. How do you behave? So basically the neshama is oir, but coupled with the information and the knowledge of dinei Torah and darkei Torah, the neshama now is fully empowered to illuminate the world, meaning to illuminate every aspect of life. This, just for the records, is one of the most common expressions that Rebbe would use very often in many of his sikhs, especially when he spoke to women and children. The Rebbe would always begin, Torah eir, Torah b'leich deveg, that without Torah, we don't know how to travel. We don't know how to behave. Like, so a situation happens. Here's a pandemic, or a peace accord in Israel with the UAE. How do you look at this? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? What's the way we should behave? What's the Torah say? So without Torah, you don't have clarity. So basically, the neshama is light, but the neshama also needs Torah to make sure that that light is going the right direction. And that creates that clarity. That's what he's saying. The neshama comes down below to be meir, like he said. The hoyer esa elamis. Okay. Asher kol zeh. I was going back to the theme of Pnimis HaKelim. Asher kol zeh. Now, all this that we just said, hu lefi, is because shaneshamis hine hamshachason hu ayidei Pnimis HaKelim. All this that we spoke about the neshamis is due to the fact that the neshamis, the way they transmit, the way they descend below, the way they continue their journey is through Pnimis HaKelim, through the inner dimension of Kelim. Va'primis de Kelim, shu etzem husar kol inyanahu shu keli lekabbalah. And the primi is the inner dimension of the Kelim, as we learned earlier, which is the etzem mahus of the Keli, as far as the Keli goes, not as far as its effect outside of it. Its core personality, which is the Kelim Pnimium, lekabel. I'm sorry, Pnimis HaKelim, Harikolim Yona Shi Keli lekabbalah. Va'primis HaKelim shu etzem mahusa, which is the core essence of the Keli. Kol Inyana is to be a Keli lekabbalah. Remember the toich, to be a receptacle to receive. Lezois. Second, I shall call Zel if you Lezois, and therefore, and that's why the neshamas who transmit through the inner dimension of the kelim, harihem kelim tevim lelakus. They're appropriate, refined, or appropriate containers for lakus, because they come from Pnimis HaKelim, so they have that personality of being receivers. They're perfectly fit to be receivers. That means kelim tevim, the right type of kelim, or it literally means good kelim, but tevim means here appropriate. It means fitting, the right kelim for elakus, because they come from Pnimis HaKelim. If the neshamas came from Chetzenis HaKelim, their function would be far more about being shluchim, not about receiving. We still have to understand what means that they radiate the world. We'll get to that in a minute. Shezeu kol etzem muhusam. This is their entire core personality, neshamas. Shem kelim pnimim, that they're internal containers. In other words, not just chitzenis kelim, they're full containers, complete receptacles. Lekabel hapnimius va'atzmius, to receive the innermost, the inner and the core of whatever is being transmitted into them. Here, of course, it means elokus. V'hainu, which means that mitzias muhusam shal neshamis, that the mitzias of the muhus of the neshamis is going back to mitzias hamuhus. Hu shem kelim lekabbalah es primius ve'atzmus ha'er atzmi. Why is this not the muhus of the neshamas? It's the mitzias of the muhus. I guess because it's still a function, be a keli. The muhus of the neshama would be a chelik elakam emal mamish, a piece of the mitzias of the muhus is a keli to lakus. In other words, it's defining what this muhus is about. That's the obvious way to explain why he's calling it mitzias of muhus. Why he has to emphasize this here. The only way I can explain is because he was talking all about muhus mitzias, mitzias muhus. So it's a Frierdiker Rebbe's language, which obviously always needs a little more explanation. But let me not dwell on that. Let's just talk about the essential theme here, and then we'll break it down if need be. So bottom line is, and it's also the arichas here is interesting. He said the last 4 lines seems a little repetitive, but I guess it's to drive the point home, and every line has a little different emphasis. But what he says now is that the neshamas are from primis hakelim. Primis hakelim, etzem mahus of primis hakeli is Kabbalah. So therefore, the neshamas that come from that are perfect containers for the mitzias, for what he calls primis ve'atzmius, which is like a new expression he hasn't used till now. Till now, he's talking about primis of the kelim. Now he's saying the kelim, primis hakelim, are a keli for the primis and atzmius of what? Like he says now, at primis ve'atzmius ha'ir atzmi. So now he's introduced not just oir, but also oir atzmi. So till now we were talking primis hakeli and chetzenis hakeli. Primis hakeli, it's a keli lekabbalah to receive oir, general. Chetzenis hakeli is to transmit outside of the keli, the function. Now he's going and saying primis hakeli is a keli also for the primis and atzmius of oir, the oir atzmi, which we've been learning about earlier. Remember, etzem oir is pashtus oir, but we'll soon try to understand how it all works together. But meanwhile, that's what he said. So just like we said about the malachim, the metzias of the muhus of the malachim is chitzenius hakelim. And that's why shluchim, that's their metzias of their muhus, that they're shluchei hashefa. They transmit and they're agents of the divine mission. That turns into metzias muhus, becomes muhus ha-metzias, that they say shira, as we learned in the bottom of last page. What about by neshamas? By neshamas, the metzias ha-muhus is primis keli, that they're a keli for a likus, not shluchei shefa. And that, now he continues, umizeba muhus mitziyuson, and that metzias ha-muhus, like the dibur sheba machshava comes machshava sheba dibur in the example I gave. This becomes muhus ha-mitziyuson lahoyer esa elam. So what's their muhus ha-metzias? Is to radiate, illuminate the world be'eir ha-teira, with the light of teira. And so now he brings it all together. Be'etzem, what they are, the muhus of the neshama is a keli for likus. But that metzias of that muhus becomes the muhus. The metzias of that muhus becomes the muhus of the metzias of their functionality. What's their function in this world? Is to bring light, illuminate the world with Torah. So by malachim, the muhus, metzias ha-muhus, is to be shluchei shefa, to carry a particular mission, like we spoke about, Mechol, Gavriel, whatever mission God wants, a Dvar Hashem. And the metzias ha-muhus becomes muhus ha-metzias to sing shira, God's praise. By neshamas, the metzias ha-muhus is to be a keli pnimi, an internal container for godliness, and that becomes the muhus metzias ha-muhus, becomes muhus ha-metzias of radiating the world with Torah, with the light of Torah. Now, I know you can ask the question, what's the difference between being a shliach of the shefa, of the flow, and being a neshama that radiates and illuminates the world with Torah? Well, I don't know if he's going to say anything. I hope he does. But if he doesn't, I'll just say it's obvious the difference. When Malach Machal or Gavriel or the Malachim are sent to earth with a particular mission, like the mission to Avram Avinu, that's not about illuminating the world with Torah. It's a particular mission, Dvar Hashem. You tell Avram Avinu that he's going to have, and Sarah, that he's going to have a child. Or whatever the mission may be. When a Neshama comes down and contends with the world, Malachim don't have the power to illuminate this world and transform this world. They have a power. They are spiritual entities that come and share a message. And that's it. And their job is over. A neshama comes packed with full of energy, divine energy. It's a keli lalakus, and its job is to train, is to illuminate and transform the world. It's a very different type of shlichus, so to speak.
It's
Though
like
he doesn't say this explicit, but it's pretty
and a
obvious. One
human
second,
being.
let me just finish. Though he doesn't say it explicitly, but clearly it's pretty obvious, and especially if you know other Maimonim, very different. Malachim cannot do what neshama can do. And precisely for this reason, since a malach is not from Primis Hakeli, does not have the power to deal with a world like ours. That's why malachim, when they try to, they end up failing. The Nephilim, and in general, that's not their mission. That's not their role. So neshama comes from a much more atzmizdika place. A malach comes from a more external level. So the malach has its particular role, and neshama's role is its mahus, is that it's a keli telekus, and its mitzias or mitzias mahus mitzias is that it radiates, illuminates the world with the light of Torah. What do you want to say?
That it's like a difference between a robot and a human being. A robot will do it perfect, but it's no feeling. It's like being done what has to be done. It's not a part of the whole thing.
Yeah, that's a good example. Correct. It's like the sun and the moon. Like all the creatures of existence, they fulfill like clockwork what God wants them to do, and that's that. Correct? Yeah.
When the Rebbe says here that it's the neshama is a keli, panim is a kelim for makabil etzem or, does that? I think that was the term etzem or. Was that? Does that mean that? What about Atmos itself? Etzem or we learned earlier. There's a lower level than etzem itself, right? It's in the ayin.
Atmos is not subject to kelim and altogether. So whenever you say keli, you right away mean it can only relate to we're not talking about Atzmus. Atzmus doesn't have any type of definition that relates to Eris and Kalim. So you can't talk about Atzmus here.
So when we say a neshama is chelik elakama mamash, we're talking about the nefesh elokis is only a keli for or rather than Atzmus itself. Is that correct? Chelik elakah.
Can you tell me the difference between Atzmus and Or?
Yes, I think so. I mean, or we learned earlier extensively is the Ayin Beis. Between,
but you're just saying words. You're just saying words. Tell me that. Tell me in simple English. The difference between Atzmi, that all it is a reflection of Atzmus and Atzmus.
One is a reflection, and one is it's Atzmus.
You're just repeating what I just said. Can you explain it in any logical way? How is Atzmi less of the
source? And Atzmus is the source, and Etzem or is a lower level of the that extends from Etzem, from the source, but not its source itself.
Okay, I don't know the difference, but you just said our words. I don't know what does that mean. What the does it have anything but Atzmus? Isn't the just a reflection of Atzmus?
No, I think Atzmus itself is something even much higher than even Etzem or.
Atzmus, can you talk about levels? Can you talk about neshamas even in Atzmus? You can't talk about anything. Atzmus is beyond any description, beyond any manifestation, beyond any definition. But anything you can talk about is only So any discussion is about you can't talk about Atzmus. Atzmus is beyond any type of definition, description, and so on. Carries Atzmus. Is a reflection of Atzmus. So as soon as you say something is relating to something, you're already talking about levels that are not Atzmus. Bottom line is you can't talk about Atzmus in this context altogether. You can only talk about things that we have some type of definition. Even chelik mamash is a definition. What does the word chelik mean? Chelik means a piece. Atzmus doesn't divide into pieces. Pieces can only possible, we learned in this Pashtus Sa'ir, is shaykh to say a piece, a higher level, a lower level. In Atzmus, all this language doesn't apply altogether.
So when we say nefesh elokis is mushrash be'etzem ba'atzmus, we were talking about.
But you're just using words. It's called semantics. Tell me what that means. Atzmus does not have anything that you can't even say anything. Mushrash, How do you know that doesn't mean Etzem Ha'er? Etzem Ha'er is also quite a high level.
Exact
I told
question.
you that the Alter Rebbe trembled when he said Atzilus. You're throwing out lines about Atzmus and Etzem Ha'er, and you're not trembling. So it means to me that you don't even know, you're just using words. What do these words mean to you? That's what I'm asking you. Explain to me what they mean, and then we'll talk. You know what Etzem Ha'er is? B'fnei Tzimtzum. It's a level that doesn't allow anything to exist. So here we are. Existence is trying to talk about Oyer. Even Ispashtus Ha'er Lifnei Tzimtzum does not allow for existence. So tell me, answer me this question. How can you and I, independent entities, be even talking about something that doesn't even allow for us to exist? It means we're not talking about those levels. We're talking about levels that we relate to, much lower levels that are all part of Giluyim. So I think you have to first go back to really understanding what we're dealing with. Atzmus is completely something that's not even in our realm. Even Oyer, Etzem Ha'er, Ispashtus, these are levels that are so beyond us that's why I find it, we're talking it sounds like we're talking about little parts of a pipe. You're asking me, is it connected to this piece of the pipe or this piece of the pipe? That's why I'm asking you. You need to understand Atzmus is completely beyond anything that we can build to Metzias Nimtza. And Oyer is not just a reflection. It's a reflection of Atzmus. It's not sunlight. And therefore it carries Atzmus to us. But even in the levels before the Tzimtzum, that's what I've been elaborating so much about, it's still completely beyond us. So we're talking about after the Tzimtzum and after Ishtalshlus, and the Neshama comes down, and Tahiri, Neshama Shenasat to be Tahiri, Atzilus, at the Barasa, at the Yitzarta, at the Nefach be, Nefesh Ruach Neshama Chai Yechida, as it comes down below, it's rooted in the Pnimius HaKelim. That's what he said. He didn't say even it's rooted in Oyer, frankly. He says the Neshama is rooted in Pnimius HaKelim because the Neshama is an identity. It's not even light. And Neshama is an identity. That identity is rooted in the inner dimension of the containers, which means a complete receptacle to receive, contain, and absorb Oyer. Now he's adding what levels of Oyer, even the Oyer Atzmi. Like he says, Pnimi is Atzmi Sa'er. He doesn't even say Lifnei Tzimtzum, not Lifnei Tzimtzum. That's not really relevant to our discussion here. But the bottom line is that Neshama is a keli for the deeper dimension of Kavanas, of the Kavana Lakus, of Atzmi's Kavana Lakus within the Oyer. And it's Metzias HaMahus, and it's Mahus HaMetzias, is its ability to now radiate and illuminate the world with Torah. That's what he's saying here. So you could ask questions. What do you mean? I learned another Maimorim that a Neshama is rooted in Atzmus. So you think it's a contradiction to what he's saying here? Obviously not. So you have to understand, what do you mean by Atzmus? What do we mean by What do we mean by Kalim? Right now he said Neshama is rooted in Pnimius HaKelim. Malachim, on the other hand, are rooted in Chitzenius HaKelim. So their mission, their function, and their role is different. Their role is, number one, that they are the Mehus HaMetzias. Metzias HaMehus is Shluchei Shefa, to be agents of the messengers of what God wants of them. And their Mehus HaMetzias is that they say Shira and praise. And in that process, they completely are consumed and bottled with ecstasy. They completely are nullified in that saying the praise to God. That's the focus here. So we want to understand Atzmus Oyer Kelim. I think you got to go back to earlier classes when we spoke at length about Atzmus. And I explained what Etzem Oyer is and what is Ispashtus Oyer and their role and so on. So I think it's important, even though, yes, it's true, people got spoiled and they just hear in classes time and again. And the Neshama is rooted in Atzmus. People say it all the time. And they don't even know what Atzmus Oyer, so what is Pnimius HaKelim. So it's words. You have to understand what the meaning of these words are. And we learned, so that's just the brief take on this.
Reb Simon, but there is definitely like Yecholas, which is Hu Ushmoi. Here we're talking about Atzmus Mamesh. This is Yecholas. You explained it. And this
but it's not on this page. But that's not the discussion on this page. It's a different discussion.
No. So Nisave, not Rotzoin. Nisave is also Atzmus. So, but he's talking here in Neshama, is Pnimius HaKelim, is not talking about Atzmus.
Of
But
course
the
not.
bottom line is that the neshama is kifi sham b'shor sheira shor but it's other ilus atel for the atmos. Not the way that he's speaking here.
First of all, why do you say neshamas? Why don't you say tachtenim? Why do you use neshamas? Nesava kodesh baruch hu liyas le'dira b'tachtenim. He doesn't even use the word neshamas. So why don't you say tachtenim amusha shenatzmus? If you really want to go there.
Because the tachtenim is like a yesh.
Oh, what's that? You're giving now explanations. You just brought a raya from the Sava that we're talking about atzmus. Tachtenim is musha shenatzmus in the Sava.
Okay, but it at neshamas, the taiva could not be fulfilled.
Hold on. But this is your words or the words from the Maimon? What you just said now, the difference between neshamas and tachtenim. You're using your own logic from other places, right?
No, you tell me. How could it be tachtenim? You tell me.
It's not the discussion of this Maimon. I wouldn't even go there.
You're right. You're right.
He's
not talking, here is not talking about it. You're right. Here
so why are we talking? So to me, I'm trying to understand the pshat in this Maimon, not in other things. If you have questions, it's a good question, but it's not relevant to our discussion now.
Okay.
You want to go into the whole discussion? I believe I explained this back when we learned this, just for the record. I discussed this at length when we were discussing it. When we were discussing Atzmos and Bilta Mitzias Nimtza and Etzema Ur and Nesava, I spoke about this at length.
Right.
And I even explained what it means. So I would advise like this. Go back to those classes, listen to it if you're interested, and see what you hear. And then if you have questions, we can go back to it. But I believe I covered all this back in the classes when we spoke about Atzmos. Now we're talking where we're talking now. This is in Seder Ishtalshalos right now. And it's a good question. Nesav and Atzmus, he said, is beyond Toyarim and beyond description, and you can't even talk about it. So again, we talk easily. We say Nesava, Atzmus. If you understood what Atzmus is, you would have, the biggest question you would have is, how does Atzmus B'chal relate to anything? Why don't you ask that question? That's the biggest question of all.
I've been asking that to myself for the last 3 weeks.
Okay, so that's a good question, and I believe I discussed it at length. And
you brought what the Friedrich
Rebbe
is saying, that this is not a toyal. The Friedrich Rebbe is saying that all of these things, like Boirei, it's not a toyal. It's not a toyal. It's not describing the Atzmos.
You answered my question now?
No, I'm saying that you explained that Ba'arichas before.
No, I'm saying, but the question you have to ask is, how could Atzmos have a relationship with anything? It's beyond anything. So that's why we had a long discussion. What is the role of Oyer? Do you remember at all the discussion, the Chiddush of the Alter Rebbe with Oyer? Do you remember this? It's a Chiddush. The Alter Rebbe was Mechadish in Samach Vov and Vayelach. Samach Vov, he says, Chiddush Rabbeinu Nishmasei be'inyan ha'Oyer. I probably spoke about it at least 2-3 hours, cumulatively. That is what you need to, if you want to address this issue, you have to go back to understanding the role of Oyer and its relationship with Atzmus. That's going to be the key. If you remember a whole thing with Bittel, Vetnish Bottel, and that Ruchni is the Kiyume Mitzaratzmei, and Mitzuse is not Mitzaratzmei. I'm going back months now. The last 3-4 months, we talked about this a long time. So I understand it's not easy.
That's why it's oil. You're right. That's why you have the oil.
But no, so what it tells me is, it's not easy stuff. So I could say this. Maybe you're riding on my understanding of it. If you want to understand it, I would highly recommend you go back to those Maimorim. Just go back to the Shiyurim. They're all recorded, and listen patiently, again and again until you get it. That's what I did. That's how you do it. There's no way you're going to get this quickly.
What Ayin Beis is that approximately, or what chapter? Do you remember?
To go back, so it's the last 10 pages in Ayin Beis. And in Tzadik Daled, we spoke about it even more at length, the last 30 pages. But you have to go back. You have to go back when we spoke about Atzmus and Oyer, that whole discussion of Atzmus and Oyer. So I'm obviously it's going to take time to absorb it, but I want to just say we've moved on here now. We can go back to it if you want me to, but it's not here. It's already assumed that that was covered. Now we're talking here. So I'm just pointing out the landscape of where we are right now.
I have a question about what you're learning right now today. It might be a klotz kasha, but I wanted to ask it anyways. When the Rebbe says that the neshama is panemius akelim and malachim are chetzonis akelim, so again, it might be just crazy question, but when we say the kav, I always understand is that there's a rashima in the kav. The kav comes in and there is a rashima for the shorsh of the kelim. Are these is the neshama from the kav or from the rashima, the kelim from the rashima? As I've learned before, maybe it's an irrelevant question, but I wanted to ask it. Is that coming from the kav, the kelim of the panemius kelim?
Let me answer the following. I think again, as you know, I always point out that if you use Hebrew language and Hebrew terms, you often miss the point. I always tell Bochrim and people learning Chassidus, if you really want to know whether you're understanding Chassidus, can you explain it to someone that doesn't know Hebrew and doesn't know any of these words? Kav, Rishimu, Kelim, Eiris, and so on. So I'm going to do that right now. And hopefully it'll be helpful. Because when you start getting stuck in words, it becomes literally mechanical. Trying to place this and this. And I'm not going to assume that we all are on the same level of understanding what Kav, Rishimu, and Kelim and Eir. So let me just, a Keli and an Eir, and I've discussed this a number of times, but it doesn't hurt to say it again. When we are physical human beings, when we hear Keli and Eir, how do we associate with that? We associate it with a cup of wine and the wine inside it. Mm-hmm. That's our, because we're tangible people. We think in sensory terms. A Keli and Eir, a light bulb and electricity, maybe a soul and a body. These are things we relate to. But when you're talking Ruchnius, Eiris a Kelim of Asiyah Ruchnius. I'm not even talking about Yitzira, Bria, and Atzilus, but definitely not higher. What does Eir and Keli mean? Aren't they both divine energy? Is a Keli like some foreign substance? In the physical world, you could say the wine is one thing, the cup is another. You buy wine in a liquor store, you buy a kos in a hardware store. And then you bring them together, and you can pour wine into your cup. But here we're talking about one God that created everything. So what's the difference between Eir and Keli? Isn't Keli also another form of, if you talk about energy, two forms of divine energy. One is called Eir, one is called Keli. So you have to understand it, what it means in simple English. What does that mean? So in simple English, I've given a few examples. One is like words on a page and the message they're conveying. The words are like a Keli, and the message is the Eir. You need both. If you only had a message and you didn't put it into words, nobody would understand it. If you only had words and had no message, it would just be empty containers. So the way the Eibishter created existence, in a way that we should be able to relate to the divine, someone say the divine is beyond expression, beyond definition. So God created it in a way that there should be two levels. The message, the divine energy, and the container is not a physical container. It's the way it's conveyed. It's a way that we can relate to it. It's like the letters on a page. So if you think of it that way, every world has two dimensions. Has the energy of that particular domain and reality, and it has the expression of that reality. You know, you could almost compare it to machshava and dibur if you wish. It's only a comparison. It's not exact. The thought behind it and the expression through words. With 10 statements, God created the world. The statements are Yehi Bereshis bara, Yehi Eir, Yehi Rakia. Those are words. But what are they carrying? They're carrying, as the Alter Rebbe explains in Shaykh V'Amunah, divine energy that's channeled through those letters. Your name is Eliezer. Your name is Shleiman. Your name is Tzvi. Your name is Yecheskel. That's just a name. It's just a symbol. It's just a name tag. But when you understand the meaning of the word, it has a whole meaning. So there's an energy in every letter and in every word. The energy is Oyer. The way it's conveyed is Kalim. So Kali and Oyer are meant to work. They're just two parts of one reality. One is expressing it, and one is what is it expressing? They're not two separate things. In this physical world, a Kali and a Oyer, electricity and a light bulb are two different things altogether. A computer, a refrigerator, and electricity are two different things. But in the higher world, there's seamless flow. Now the question is, how connected are the Oyeris and the Kali? They definitely are connected, or else it wouldn't be called a Kali. You can't call something a Kali unless it has some relationship with the Oyer in it. So this explains that there's a difference between Oyeris and Kalim in Asiya, and Oyeris and Kalim in Yetzira, and Oyeris and Kalim in Bria, and Oyeris and Kalim in Atzilus, all the way to Akudim. So to use the example of conception, at the moment of conception, it's like 10 energies in one container. All the personality and everything about the characteristics of the child that will be born in 9 months from now is all contained, concentrated in one keli. It's called one cell. The cell will then split, the kalim will split, but it will still be kalim to the Oyeris. When a healthy child is born, it's a full-bodied child, Ramache Varim, Shasa Gidim, but it's a keli to the Oyer. When you look at the stage of conception, there you only see only one small cell, tiny cell, and everything's concentrated. You can't even tell. My point is that there's different levels of Oyeris and Kalim interact with each other. What's relevant to our discussion here is that in every Oyer Keli, there's two dimensions to the relationship. When you talk about the functionality of the Keli, like in this case, let's talk about, I'm giving the example, back to the example with words on a page. When an author is writing an essay or an article or a book, so there's two parts to this, generally two parts. It's really more than two. Or an artist is painting a picture on a canvas. One is, what is the message he wants to convey? That's critical. What's the spirit? What do you want to say? And then there's how are you going to say it? What words are you going to choose? What phrases? What sentiments? What examples? So in art, there's the spirit and the intention. That's the Oyer. The Keli is the how. How are you going to express it? Which colors, which images, etc. So Oyer and Keli, when they're working well, they are hand in hand. The spirit informs the instrument, the function, and the function accesses the Oyer. They're working hand in hand. A good writer, the words he chooses are going to reflect the spirit in the best way. If he chooses the wrong words, his spirit may not be conveyed properly, or it'll be convoluted or confusing. So you can say the perfect work of art or the perfect writing, as perfect as humans can be, is that the Oyeris and Kalim are balanced in the most possible, in the most seamless way possible. But when you really dissect it, and you do the art of writing, you go to school to learn how to write, or you learn how to write by working with experienced writers. It's not just what do you want to say. It's a whole art of figuring out how you're going to say it. So the Chitzenius HaKeli is the part of how it's being expressed that the student or the reader or the viewer of the art is going to receive it. How are they going to relate to it? So this is much more focused on the function. But there's another part of the letters and the words. The Pnimius HaKelim, the Pnimius of the Oisius, is are they conveying properly the spirit, the Oyer, that's supposed to be traveling through them. So when we stood in Chazorah, when we were Chayzerim, and I was standing in front of Fabrengen, it was two different roles. One role is when you're standing in front of the Rebbe and he's speaking with Pnimius HaKeli as much as possible. All you're there to do is absorb, to contain. You're a Keli to the Oyer that's being nimshach to you. That's it. You're not thinking, how am I going to write this? How am I going to explain it to whether it's people who are indoctrinated or not indoctrinated, affiliated or not affiliated. That's not the job then. That's the job then is Pnimius HaKeli, receive whatever is being said to you. Then comes stage 2. Then you go and say, okay, you write it all down. Then you begin to compose it and turn it into a working document. That this document should now be able to be read by others. By others. Remember, hashpah chutzma atzmusa. It's not about you receiving it now. It's about how is this going to be conveyed that someone else reading it who was not by the Farbrengen or didn't understand what was by the Farbrengen is going to be able to understand it and learn it and teach it and follow the Hiros and so on. That's where the Chetzenius HaKeli comes into play, because its job is to now express it and express it properly. So you can be a great Chayzer, a great Pnimius HaKeli, and be a terrible Chetzenius HaKeli. You could absorb well, but then afterwards you don't know how to write it down. You don't know how to communicate it to someone else. You could also be the other way around. There can be a person who knows is very good at writing it down, but he's not good at absorbing it. You give him an idea written down, he'll turn it into something that a functionality of a Chetzenius Keli that really shines for others. Some people can do both, some can do neither. But that's not what I'm going toward. So what I'm trying to do is explain that the only way to understand this is to bring it into some type of examples like I just did. And then you could say, so in the state of Shtalshlus, you'll say Malochim relate more to Chetzenius HaKelim. It's functionality. It's about a message, like we said. Shira is the outer dimension of that. With the neshama is primarily about being an excellent receptacle. Its bitla allows it to receive elikus, so it's rooted in Pnimius HaKelim. And then, because of that, from there it extends that the neshama now can go and radiate the world and teach and illuminate the world with the light of Torah. And that's what we're discussing here. If this is all within the Shtalshlus, where you have functional neshamas and you're identifying their role. If you took Lifnei Tzimtzum, which is what we learned pages before, we're not discussing there. He didn't discuss neshamas. He didn't discuss malachim. He didn't even discuss kalim, by the way. There are no kalim Lifnei Tzimtzum. Kalim begin, even not in Ak, we learned. There's also almost no kalim. It's an akudim after the tzimtzum. So when you talk about kav, rishima, and so on, you're talking about levels that are the root of things. The kav is the root of eir pnimi la'acharat tzimtzum. The rishima is called sheirish hakelim, sheirish. But we learn even ak doesn't even have really kalim. It's only sheirish neshama is the gufas. Rishima is not kalim. It's rishima is the root that will begin the process that after levels and levels, kalim will begin to emerge. The Shima is more you can call the koyach hagvul la'achrei hatzimtzum, which is the sheirish hakelim. In the Alter Rebbe in Shaykhid V'Amunah, at the end of chapter 4, he says tzimtzum nikra kalim, and the explanation is that tzimtzum creates the possibility of kalim, because the tzimtzum is like without a tzimtzum there'd be no kalim, and there tzimtzum and Shima go hand in hand. Anyway, but I don't want to go too far off the reservation here. I'm trying to keep it focused to where we are. So we're talking now the process of how it works in, remember, all this is coming to teach us about Pnimius HaChetzenius HaEir, which will take us back to the Ayin according to the Pirush, the third interpretation of Eir Pnimi. And I think when we bring it all together, we'll see what we're dealing with here. Yesh HaMiti, Yesh HaNivra, and an Ayin Be'emtza that divides into two. And there's many interpretations what that separation is. But that's where we are now, is trying to understand the interface. This is all interface discussion. Even Malach is an interface on one level. And Neshama for sure, because on one hand, the Neshama is the Keli. On the other hand, it's Mashpia Eir, Torah Eir in the world, illuminating the world around it. So I hope that was helpful.
Sure, yeah, thank you.
Okay. So I'll just read a few more lines on this page. So we said like this. And from being a keli for elikus, a container for the divine, this is mohus ha-mitzias ha-mohus, comes the mehus ha-mitzias, that the neshamis is to radiate, illuminate the world with a light of Torah. And the intention in this is And the intention in this is the be'etzem inyan yeridas hanashamis hi yeson lamata. In the core concept of the descent of the souls and their being here down below, meaning in this world, hine meir pnimi be'elam. Here's the key. It's in order to bring, the intention is that they should radiate not just the er chitzeni, not just a superficial or outer dimension of light, but a er pnimi in this world. In other words, even though it's a descent and is going through a lot of ishtalshlus, the neshama, because it's rooted in pnimius hakelim, carries within it pnimius, er pnimi, from the pnimius and atzmius of er. No, it's from the deepest levels of the divine. And that's the kavanah, not just to radiate the world, but to radiate it with a pnimi. A malach can't do that because a malach has a different function, a different purpose. That's what a neshama does. So that's why we understand now why to radiate this world, you need dafka a neshama that's a keli to the er pnimi. In other words, to use the example I said before, if the author is a different individual than the one that's conveying the message and receiving the message, you're not going to have quite that seamlessness. Because the author doesn't really get the message. He's just good at writing words. It's a wordsmith. It's like the example they give about the guy that was reading the letter to someone who couldn't read, and the letter said that his father passed away. So the person who read the letter, he continued reading. The person who was listening, who can't read, fainted. They say, what do you mean? He's reading the letter because it was not about his father. He's just a mouthpiece. All he is like a machine. He's translating. And the neshama carries er pnimi within it because it's from pnimi sakelim. And at the same time, it has the power then to bring that er pnimi into the world around it. That's what he's essentially saying here. So this is, now you can see the importance of this whole discussion, because you talk about an interface. What kind of how powerful is that interface? A neshama carrying the deepest levels of the divine through the Eiris, through the different levels of Eir, obviously, through Primis HaKelim, all the way to be able to illuminate the world. Yeah. I think we'll stop here because it's a continuation, but it's going into a new discussion about how a neshama actually does that. How even in Gashmi's things, we bring a lakus into this world. So I see why the Rebbe, Friedrich Rebbe, now is bringing all this in, because it really helps understand. Because the Rebbe Rashab talks about it all in the higher worlds. This is making it far more functional and like applied to real life, that the neshama is coming from the previous and so on. I want to just say one more thing before we conclude today. In Eir itself, we've learned more than once that there's many levels. If you remember, there's Etzem Eir, Spashtus Eir. But you may remember in volume 1, he spoke about in Eir itself, there's the Eir as it connects to its source. There's the Eir as it begins to relate to Kalim. And then there's the Eir as it manifests in Kalim. In faculties, we call this Keiches Gluyim, Keiches Nalamim, and Keiches Atzmim. So there's an Eir that's like a Keich Atzmi, there's an Eir that's a Keich Nelam, and there's a Eir that's a Keich Goli, a Eir Goli. So there's plenty of levels here to go. Even though we're talking about Primis HaKelim and Eir, there's many dimensions. Not the highest levels of Eir can't even go into Akeli. But yet, the more bittul the Primis HaKeli has to the Eir, the more it can channel the deeper levels of Eir. And we'll talk about that more. Basically, more bittul, the more you can channel and the more you can contain. So just wanted to add that into the equation here. Okay, so we'll stop here, basically middle of page 110.